The wind howling outside the reinforced glass of the 88th floor sounded like a dying beast. Tariq pressed his back against the freezing metal of the server rack, his breath fogging in the hyper-cooled air of the data center. It was the year 2112, and in the perpetual winter of Neo-Reykjavik, warmth was a luxury only the corporate elite could afford. Tariq, however, was about to afford a lot of it. He pulled the neural jack from his wrist, his fingers trembling slightly as the final encrypted file transferred to his localized drive. The job was supposed to be simple: break into the Acher conglomerate, slice into their financial sector, and walk away with 10 million unsecured credits. But as Tariq slipped the heavy silver drive into his insulated jacket, and the ambient blue lights of the server room violently snapped to a harsh, pulsating crimson. "Intruder detected in Sector 4, a mechanized female voice echoed from the ceiling. Tariq swore under his breath. He was good, but the Acer security system was legendary. He sprinted toward the maintenance shaft, his boots echoing sharply on the grated floor. He just needed to reach the ventilation chute, drop down 3 levels, and deploy his glider. The heavy blast doors at the end of the corridor hissed open. Stepping through the threshold was a man who seemed to absorb the red emergency lights, turning them into cold shadows. Soren Kvist. Everyone in the underworld knew the name, but few had seen the face and lived to talk about it. Soren was the chief of security for Isir. He was a towering figure, broad-shouldered and wrapped in a tailored, charcoal-gray tactical coat. His pale blonde hair was slicked back, and his eyes, a piercing, cybernetically enhanced ice blue, locked instantly onto Tariq. "You have exactly 5 seconds to drop the drive, thief," Soren's voice boomed down the hallway. It was a rich, deep baritone that vibrated in Tariq's chest, commanding and utterly devoid of mercy. "I prefer to keep my earnings, Chief," Tariq yelled back, forcing a smirk he did not feel. He threw a localized flash grenade onto the floor. The corridor erupted in a blinding white light. Tariq did not wait to see if it worked. He dove into the maintenance shaft, the rough metal scraping the leather of his jacket. He slid down the narrow chute in total darkness, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Above him, he could hear the heavy, methodical thud of boots. Soren was not just sending drones. He was coming after Tariq himself. 10 minutes later, Tariq tumbled out of a drainage pipe into the neon-drenched slums of the lower levels. The smell of sulfur and street food filled the damp air. He pulled his hood up, blending into the crowd of night market vendors and tired factory workers, not daring to look back until he reached his safe house. His sanctuary was a tiny, dilapidated apartment on the 42nd floor of a crumbling residential block. Tariq locked the heavy steel door, engaged the triple deadbolts, and collapsed onto his worn-out chair. He pulled the silver drive from his pocket. It felt unusually heavy. He plugged it into his personal terminal, ready to route the stolen credits into his phantom accounts. Instead of a financial ledger, a complex, 3-dimensional neural map bloomed across his monitors. Tariq leaned in, his brow furrowing. This was not corporate money. This was biological data. Brain waves, memory patterns, curiosity getting the better of him. Tariq initiated a playback sequence. The screen flickered, and a wash of static filled the room before settling into an audio log. Subject 72, emotional response test. A clinical, sterile voice stated. Then another voice answered. It was younger, shaking with suppressed terror, yet unmistakably familiar. "Please, I don't want to forget him. You can't make me forget him." Tariq froze. The hair on his arm stood on end. It was Soren Kvist. The ruthless, emotionless security chief sounded like a terrified young man begging for his life. Tariq frantically typed across his keyboard, pulling up the visual data attached to the audio. The image was grainy, showing a sterile white room. A younger Soren was strapped to a chair, tears streaming down his face. But what made Tariq's breath catch in his throat was the boy sitting in the cell next to Soren's, a boy with dark, unruly hair and terrified brown eyes. It was a young Tariq. Tariq stumbled backward, his chair tipping over and crashing onto the floor. Panic and confusion warred in his mind. He had no memory of that place. He had no memory of Soren. Before he could process the sheer impossibility of what he was looking at, a heavy, resounding knock echoed through the apartment. "Open the door, Tariq." A deep, dangerous voice resonated from the other side of the reinforced steel. "You have something that belongs to me." Tariq scrambled backward, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The reinforced steel door groaned under an immense weight. A blinding shower of orange sparks rained from the heavy hinges as a thermal cutter sliced through the metal with terrifying ease. Soren was not asking for permission. He was simply giving Tariq a warning before making his entrance. Tariq snatched the silver drive from the terminal port and shoved it deep into the inner pocket of his jacket. He frantically scanned the cramped room. The single window led to a sheer drop of 40 stories. There was no fire escape. He was entirely trapped. With a deafening crack, the door gave way, crashing heavily onto the concrete floor and sending up a cloud of gray dust. As the haze settled, Soren stepped over the threshold. The security chief was holding a sleek, black plasma pistol, its barrel leveled perfectly at the center of Tariq's chest. Up close, Soren was even more imposing. His broad chest rose and fell in measured, calm breaths, while Tariq felt like he was suffocating in his own living room. "Hand it over," Soren ordered, his ice-blue eyes devoid of any recognizable emotion. "You do not even know what it is, do you?" Tariq asked, his voice shaking despite his best efforts to sound brave. "Azir sent you to retrieve financial data, but that is not what is on this drive, Chief." Soren took a slow, calculated step forward. "My orders are to recover stolen corporate property and eliminate the thief. What the property contains is above my pay grade and yours. Pass it to me, Tariq. Do not make this messy." "It is a memory drive," Tariq blurted out, pressing his back against the cold glass of the window. "Your memories, Soren, and mine." For a fraction of a second, the mechanical precision of Soren's advance faltered. His eyes narrowed, and a minuscule twitch pulled at the corner of his strong jaw. "You are lying to save your life. Azir does not map employee memories." "Then why did I just hear a recording of you begging a doctor not to erase me from your mind?" Tariq countered, his words spilling out in a desperate, breathy rush. "They called you Subject 72. We were in a white room together. We were just kids, Soren. They took something from us." The plasma pistol in Soren's grip wavered. Just an inch, but it was enough to tell Tariq that the corporate armor was cracking. Soren stared at the data splicer, a ghost of deep confusion flickering behind his cybernetic gaze. Or he opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to demand proof, but the words never left his lips. Before either man could react, the reinforced glass window behind Tariq shattered into a million glittering pieces. A heavy, armored combat drone, bearing the elite black and gold insignia of Aesir High Command, crashed into the apartment. Soren did not hesitate. He lunged forward, his heavy coat sweeping through the air, and tackled Tariq to the ground, just as a barrage of heavy kinetic rounds shredded the space where Tariq had been standing only a heartbeat before. The weight of Soren's body pressed Tariq firmly against the floorboards, shielding him from the raining glass. "They tracked my biometric signature," Soren shouted over the deafening roar of the drone's weapons. He rolled off Tariq, bracing himself on one knee, and fired 3 precise shots into the machine's central core, dropping it to the floor in a smoking, sparking heap. "I thought you were their golden boy," Tariq coughed, waving away the thick, acrid smoke filling the room. "I am," Soren said, his expression hardening into a mask of grim realization. "Which means that whatever is on that drive is so sensitive, the board of directors just authorized a lethal strike to eliminate both the thief and the security chief sent to catch him." The sound of heavy rotors echoed from the neon-lit sky outside the broken window. 2 more combat transports were hovering into view, their targeting lasers cutting through the darkness and painting the walls of the ruined apartment in deadly red light. Soren grabbed Tariq by the collar of his jacket and hauled him roughly to his feet, their faces suddenly inches apart. Tariq could feel the heat radiating from the larger man, a stark contrast to the freezing wind whipping through the shattered window. "If what you said about our past is true, you're going to show me," Soren demanded, his voice dropping to an intense whisper that sent a shiver down Tariq's spine. But right now, Soren turned and kicked open the heavy metal access grate to the building's central ventilation shaft. We need to jump. Tariq did not have time to argue. A second volley of plasma fire tore through the apartment walls, turning the air into a blistering inferno. He grabbed the edges of the metal grate and threw himself into the suffocating darkness of the shaft, the rush of freezing air swallowing his breathless gasp. Soren dove in a split second later, just as the room above them detonated in a massive fireball. They plummeted through the vertical drop, the smooth metal walls offering zero traction. Tariq squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for a fatal impact, but the shaft suddenly angled sharply. They hit the slope hard, sliding at a terrifying speed through the twisting guts of the residential block. Suddenly, the chute ended. They were violently expelled into the open air, crashing heavily into a towering mountain of discarded synthetic textiles in an abandoned subterranean recycling facility. Tariq groaned, the wind completely knocked out of him. He tried to sit up, but a heavy weight pinned him down. He opened his eyes to find Soren sprawled on top of him, the larger man having instinctively wrapped his arms around Tariq to shield him during the brutal landing. For a long, agonizing moment, neither of them moved. The cavernous room was deadly silent, save for the steady drip of a leaking water pipe and their own ragged breathing. Tariq was hyper-aware of the solid wall of muscle pressing against his chest, the heat radiating from Soren's body seeping through their damp clothes. Soren slowly pushed himself up on his forearms, hovering just inches above Tariq. His ice-blue eyes, usually so cold and unreadable, were wide and searching, tracing the lines of Tariq's face in the dim, yellow emergency lighting. "Are you injured?" Soren asked, his voice a low, rough rumble that sent a sudden, unexpected thrill straight down Tariq's spine. "I'm fine," Tariq managed to whisper, his throat suddenly incredibly dry. He could not look away from the intense vulnerability he saw fracturing the security chief's stoic facade. Soren was looking at him not as a petty thief, but as a ghost brought back to life. Soren lingered for a heartbeat longer than necessary before abruptly rolling off and standing up, the professional mask slamming back into place. He brushed the dust from his tactical coat and scanned the dark warehouse. "We cannot stay here. Azir will sweep the lower levels within the hour," Soren said, his tone crisp and commanding once more. "I know a place," Tariq replied, scrambling to his feet and pulling his jacket tight against the subterranean chill. "An old maintenance tunnel on level 12. The electromagnetic shielding is so thick that no drone or scanner can penetrate it. We will be ghosts." 30 minutes of navigating, flooded walkways and rusted catwalks brought them to a heavy, blast-resistant door hidden behind a waterfall of toxic runoff. Tariq bypassed the rusted lock with a crude physical tool, and they slipped inside a small, dry bunker illuminated only by the faint glow of luminescent moss growing on the concrete walls. Tariq reached into his pocket and pulled out the silver drive, along with a battered, portable holographic projector he always carried for field jobs. He set the device on a rusted metal crate between them. "Are you ready to see the truth, Chief?" Tariq asked, looking up at the imposing man. Soren stared at the small silver rectangle as if it were a venomous snake. His jaw clenched so tightly, a muscle leaped in his cheek. He gave a single, stiff nod. Tariq slotted the drive into the projector. The device hummed, projecting a shaky, three-dimensional blue image into the space between them. It was the same white room from before. The two young boys were sitting on the floor, holding hands tightly, their faces stained with tears. "They want to take the pain away, Soren," the young Tariq whispered in the recording, his voice trembling. "They said if we forget the fire, we will not hurt anymore." "I do not care about the fire," the young Soren replied fiercely, squeezing the other boy's hand. "If I forget the fire, I forget how you saved me. I will not let them take you from my mind. I promise, Tariq, I will find you." Tariq felt a hot tear slip down his cheek. He looked up at Soren, expecting to see shock or denial. Instead, Soren was clutching his head with both hands. A low, A agonizing groan tearing from his throat. The cybernetic implants around his temples began to glow a violent, searing red, and he dropped to his knees, screaming as the encrypted memories violently clashed with a corporate failsafe activating deep within his brain, threatening to tear his mind completely apart. Tariq dropped to his knees beside the agonizing man. The air smelled of burning ozone as the implants in Soren's skull dangerously overheated. It was a cognitive wipe, a brutal corporate failsafe designed to lobotomize any asset attempting to access classified neurological data. Soren, look at me, Tariq shouted, grabbing the broad shoulders of the security chief. Soren's eyes rolled back, his massive frame convulsing as the digital purge ripped through his synapses. Tariq knew he had exactly one chance to stop it. He ripped off his heavy leather glove and exposed the illegal silver data jack integrated directly into his right wrist. He grabbed the back of Soren's neck, feeling the intense, feverish heat of his skin, and forcefully jammed his neural cable into the primary access port hidden behind Soren's left ear. The world around Tariq dissolved into a chaotic storm of digital static and blinding white light. He was thrown into the chaotic architecture of Soren's mind. Walls of red code, the Aesir defense protocols, were actively hunting down and deleting the fragile, newly restored blue fragments of their shared childhood. Tariq's fingers flew across his holographic keyboard in the physical world, his own brain acting as a localized firewall to shield Soren's memories. "Hold on, Chief," Tariq whispered, with sweat dripping down his face as he rapidly typed out a counter-virus. "I am not letting them take you away from me again." For 10 agonizing minutes, it was a brutal tug of war. Tariq poured every ounce of his slicing skill into the connection, fighting the ruthless corporate algorithms. He built a digital fortress around the memory of the White Room, around the promise they made to each other, wrapping his own neural signature around Soren's to anchor him. Finally, with a heavy metallic click, the red code shattered. Tariq gasped, breaking the connection and pulling his jack free. He slumped back against the damp concrete wall, utterly exhausted. Soren collapsed onto his side, his chest heaving as he drew in deep, ragged breaths. The searing red glow faded from his temples, replaced by the normal, the cool blue of his optical enhancements. The cavern was silent once more, except for the desperate rhythm of their breathing. Slowly, Soren pushed himself up. He looked at Tariq, but the cold, calculating glare of the corporate enforcer was entirely gone. In its place was a profound, overwhelming tenderness that made Tariq's breath hitch in his throat. Soren reached out, his large, calloused hand trembling slightly as he gently cupped Tariq's cheek. His thumb brushed away a tear that Tariq had not realized he shed. "Tariq," Soren breathed, the name sounding like a prayer on his lips. "It was you. It was always you." Tariq leaned into the warm touch, the years of running and loneliness melting away under Soren's intense gaze. He reached up and covered Soren's hand with his own. "You found me," Tariq smiled, a shaky, relieved sound escaping his lips. Soren leaned in closer, the distance between them vanishing. Tariq could feel the heat of Soren's breath, his eyes fluttering shut as their lips were mere millimeters apart, gravity pulling them into an inevitable, desperate kiss. But the moment was violently shattered. A deafening siren erupted from Tariq's wrist terminal, flashing a blinding crimson. "Warning!" his artificial intelligence system shrieked. "Direct neural bridge has compromised our location. Class A strike team descending rapidly. Breach imminent in 10 seconds. Soren's eyes snapped open, the tender lover instantly vanishing as the lethal protector returned, grabbing his plasma pistol, just as the heavy steel door of their bunker began to groan and buckle inward under the explosive force of a shaped breaching charge. The heavy steel door blew inward, riding a shockwave of fire and twisted metal. Soren grabbed Tariq by the waist, hauling him violently behind the rusted iron chassis of an old generator, just as a hail of kinetic rounds shredded the concrete where they had been kneeling. 3 heavily armored operatives stormed through the thick, acrid smoke, their tactical visors glowing an eerie, insectoid green in the darkness. They were the Hounds of Izir, the elite elimination squad that reported directly to the corporate board of directors. Targets acquired, the lead operative barked over the external speakers of their armor. Execute the traitor and the thief. Soren did not wait for them to lock their sights. He vaulted over the generator, moving with a fluid speed and lethal ferocity that defied his massive size. He fired two precise, some blinding blue blasts from his plasma pistol, catching the lead operative directly in the chest plate and sending the soldier crashing backward into the flooded corridor. Tariq, the maintenance hatch behind the moss wall, Soren yelled over the deafening roar of returning gunfire, pinning down the remaining two soldiers with a rapid, suppressive volley. Blow the lock. Tariq did not freeze. He scrambled on his hands and knees, keeping his head low as chunks of the ceiling exploded around him. He reached the far wall, frantically tearing away the thick layer of luminescent green moss to reveal a rusted, heavy circular hatch. It was an emergency pressure valve leading down into the city's ancient submerged drainage system. He pulled a localized electromagnetic pulse grenade from his belt, a highly illegal military-grade explosive he had been saving for exactly this kind of disaster. He jammed the device directly against the electronic locking mechanism of the hatch. "Fire in the hole!" Tariq screamed, shielding his eyes. The pulse detonated with a silent flash of brilliant white light, instantly frying the lock and temporarily blinding the optical sensors of the two remaining strike team members. The heavy circular hatch groaned in protest, swinging downward to reveal a dark, rushing torrent of black water 20 feet below. Soren fell back, sliding into the cover of the open hatchway just as the strike team operatives shook off the blindness and switched their visors to thermal targeting. "It's a blind drop," Tariq shouted. Over the terrifying roar of the underground river, staring down into the pitch-black abyss. "We do not know where that current leads, Soren. It could flush us straight into the turbine grates." "It leads away from a firing squad," Soren replied grimly. He attempted to reload his plasma pistol, but the weapon let out a low, descending beep. The thermal core was entirely depleted. He threw the useless gun to the floor. The heavy, synchronized thud of armored boots marching down the corridor outside indicated that reinforcements had arrived. A dozen more green targeting lasers pierced through the lingering smoke, converging precisely on the opening of the hatchway. Soren grabbed Tariq's hand, his grip warm, calloused, and utterly unyielding. The icy, robotic exterior of the corporate enforcer was entirely gone. In its place burned a fierce, desperate protective fire in his deep blue eyes. "I lost you once to that white room." "Ah, Tariq," Soren said, his deep voice cutting clearly through the chaos of the gunfire and the roaring water. "I am not letting them take you away from me a second time. We jump on 3. The green laser sights crept up their legs, settling menacingly over their hearts. 1, Soren counted, pulling Tariq closer to the perilous edge. 2, Tariq echoed, his heart hammering wildly as he squeezed Soren's hand, intertwining their fingers. 3, they threw themselves forward into the pitch-black abyss together, just as the entire strike team opened fire, their intertwined bodies plummeting down toward the freezing, rushing black water below, while a relentless hail of kinetic rounds shattered the heavy metal grating above them, raining brilliant orange sparks down into the dark, echoing abyss. The impact with the water was like hitting a wall of solid concrete. The freezing current instantly knocked the air completely out of Tariq's lungs. Black swirling rapids pulled them beneath the surface, tumbling them violently over smooth, submerged stones. Tariq panicked, his limbs flailing in the icy, suffocating void, but Soren's grip never broke. The larger man's heavy arm wrapped tightly around Tariq's waist, anchoring him against the chaotic tide. Soren kicked powerfully against the churning undertow, fighting the ancient subterranean river with sheer, brute force. His cybernetic optical implants pierced the murky water, guiding them away from a massive churning filtration turbine that threatened to pull them under and grind them into dust. With a final, agonizing surge of strength, Soren dragged them both upward, was breaking the surface of the water just as Tariq felt his lungs burning on the absolute verge of collapse. Tariq gasped, choking on the foul-tasting water and the stale, damp air. Soren hauled them onto a narrow, rusted maintenance walkway, slick with centuries of toxic algae. They collapsed side by side onto the cold iron grating, coughing violently and shivering uncontrollably as the freezing subterranean wind bit through their soaked clothing. "Are you with me?" Soren rasped, his voice barely audible over the deafening roar of the river below. Tariq nodded weakly, rolling onto his side to face the security chief. In the dim, flickering light of a failing emergency bulb, Soren looked entirely wrecked. His perfectly tailored corporate coat was shredded, and a deep, bleeding gash crossed his temple, likely from falling debris. Yet, his ice-blue gaze remained fixed firmly on Tariq, fiercely protective and intensely tender. Tariq reached out, his freezing fingers gently touching the side of Soren's face, his thumb grazing the edge of the wound. "You are bleeding, Chief," he whispered, a small, breathless, exhausted smile touching his lips. Soren leaned into the touch, closing his eyes for a brief, incredibly vulnerable moment. "I have survived far worse, Tariq," he replied softly, his voice a low rumble. "I just needed to ensure you were safe." Soren slowly sat up, wrapping his massive arms around Tariq and pulling the smaller man tightly against his broad chest to share his body heat. Tariq buried his face into the damp, torn fabric of Soren's shirt, inhaling the scent of ozone, rain, and the faint, familiar musk of the boy he had lost so many years ago. Surrounded by danger and darkness, it felt incredibly, impossibly right. They sat there in the shadows, finding a fleeting moment of profound peace in the depths of a hostile corporate-ruled city. But the quiet intimacy was violently interrupted by a chilling, echoing sound bouncing down the rusted tunnel. It was a slow, methodical clapping. From the shadows of the walkway stepped a tall, slender figure draped in an immaculate white trench coat that seemed to unnaturally repel the grime of the sewers. Tariq felt Soren's body instantly turn to stone, the tender lover vanishing in a single heartbeat to be replaced by the lethal, calculating protector. A truly touching reunion. A smooth, chillingly polite voice echoed off the damp concrete walls. "But I am afraid the Azure Board of Directors is not known for its sentimental mercy." Tariq felt his blood run entirely cold. It was Director Vance, the head of the Cognitive Research Division, the very architect of the sterile white room from their darkest nightmares. He was flanked by only 2 heavily modified skeletal combat synthetics. The rest of his heavily armed strike team had been too bulky to navigate the narrow, flooded maintenance shafts, but these agile nightmares were more than enough. Their plasma weapons were already powering up with a high-pitched, lethal whine as Vance calmly raised his gloved hand and snapped his fingers, a sharp, echoing sound that cut through the roar of the subterranean river. The 2 skeletal synthetics lunged forward, their metallic joints whirring with terrifying speed. Soren did not hesitate. He pushed Tariq firmly behind him, placing his own battered body between the data splicer and the advancing machines. With his plasma pistol lost to the river, Soren had only his bare hands and the sheer, brutal strength of his cybernetic enhancements. "You are a defective product, Soren," Vance sneered, his white trench coat billowing slightly in the damp draft. "We spent billions erasing that useless emotional attachment, molding you into the perfect corporate shield. And yet, one ghost from your childhood surfaces, and you throw away your entire existence." "He is not a ghost," Soren growled, his deep voice vibrating with pure, unadulterated rage. "He is my reality, and you will not touch him." The first synthetic swung a glowing plasma blade aimed directly at Soren's neck. Soren ducked under the lethal arc, his heavy fist colliding with the machine's chest, plating with the force of a freight train. The impact echoed like a thunderclap, caving in the metal chassis and sending the synthetic stumbling backward into the iron railing. But the second machine was already attacking, its metallic claws tearing a deep, agonizing gash across Soren's shoulder. Soren grunted in pain but did not yield an inch. Tariq knew Soren could not fight them off forever. The security chief was bleeding and exhausted. Tariq frantically scanned the rusted walkway. His eyes locked onto a thick, exposed power conduit running along the damp concrete wall, pulsing with high-voltage electricity meant for the massive water filtration turbines. "Soren, push them toward the wall," Tariq shouted, ripping the heavy leather glove off his right hand. Soren did not ask questions. He trusted Tariq completely. With a deafening roar, Soren tackled the damaged synthetic, using its metal body as a battering ram to slam the second machine violently against the concrete wall, pinning them both directly beneath the exposed conduit. Tariq lunged forward. He did not have a weapon, but he had his illegal neural jack. He bypassed his terminal entirely. Praying that the illegal grounding failsafe in his wrist implant would hold, he jammed the silver spike of his cable directly into the frayed, sparking wires of the high-voltage line. The surge of raw electricity was agonizing. Tariq screamed as thousands of volts of raw, unfiltered power flooded his artificial nervous system, turning his vision entirely white. He fought through the blinding pain, and using his own body as a living conduit to route the massive electrical current directly into the cybernetic network of the two pinned machines. The synthetics convulsed violently, their internal circuits overloading in a shower of brilliant blue sparks and thick black smoke. They collapsed to the grated floor, completely fried. Tariq fell to his knees, his entire body trembling violently from the electrical shock. Soren rushed to his side, catching him before he hit the iron grating, his large hands frantically checking Tariq for fatal burns. "I am all right," Tariq gasped, leaning heavily against Soren's broad chest, his breath coming in shallow, ragged bursts. "I am okay." Vance stared at the smoking wreckage of his elite bodyguards, his calm demeanor finally cracking into a mask of pure, vicious fury. He reached inside his pristine white coat and pulled out a sleek, silver prototype sidearm, aiming the glowing barrel squarely at Tariq's head. "If the neurological failsafe will not erase you," Vance hissed, his finger tightening slowly on the hair trigger, "then I will simply have to permanently delete the problem manually, right here and now." The silver weapon pulsed with a blinding violet light. Soren moved faster than humanly possible. He twisted his massive frame, completely shielding Tariq with his own broad back, just as the prototype weapon discharged. A deafening, unnatural crack echoed through the cavern. Soren let out a sharp, agonizing gasp as the violent energy tore straight through his right shoulder, searing flesh and melting synthetic bone. The impact threw him backward, driving both men hard against the cold, damp concrete wall of the tunnel. "Soren!" Tariq screamed, his heart stopping completely in his chest. Despite the devastating wound, the security chief did not fall. Fueled by a lifetime of repressed rage and a profound, desperate need to protect the man he loved, Soren pushed himself off the wall. He ignored the smoking, catastrophic hole in his shoulder and lunged forward, grabbing Director Vance by the throat with his remaining good arm. Vance choked, his pristine white trench coat instantly stained with Soren's blood as the massive security chief lifted the director entirely off his feet. The silver prototype weapon slipped from Vance's trembling fingers, clattering uselessly against the iron grating before tumbling down into the rushing black river 20 feet below. "You do not get to decide who I am anymore," Soren snarled, his deep voice vibrating with lethal intent. He stepped forward, holding the struggling director out over the edge of the rusted walkway, the roaring rapids churning hungrily beneath them. Vance clawed desperately at Soren's unyielding iron grip, his eyes bulging with sudden terror. But even in the face of death, a wicked, bloodied smile slowly twisted the director's pale face. "If I fall," Vance choked out, his voice a wet, ragged wheeze, "I take your precious memories with me. The final purge protocol in your head, it is linked directly to my biometric heartbeat. If my heart stops beating..." Tariq felt the blood drain entirely from his face. He frantically tapped the cracked screen of his wrist terminal, scanning the neural frequencies radiating from Soren's head. Vance was not bluffing. A catastrophic secondary wipe command was sitting dormant in Soren's neural implant, tied irrevocably to the director's life signs. If Vance died, Soren's mind would be violently and permanently erased. He would become an empty shell. Soren, stop! Do not drop him! Tariq yelled, struggling to his feet and stumbling toward them. His pulse is a dead man's switch. Soren froze, his ice-blue eyes locking onto Tariq. The terrifying rage in his expression wavered, replaced by a heartbreaking resignation. He looked from Vance down to the dark, freezing water, his grip tightening. I would rather be empty than live in a world where he can hurt you, Tariq, Soren whispered softly, preparing to release his hold. No, please, Tariq begged, reaching out to grab Soren's blood-soaked sleeve. We can find another way. I can slice the link. Just give me 5 minutes. But the ancient rusted iron grating beneath Soren and Vance, weakened by the fierce battle, the electrical explosion, and centuries of relentless rot, suddenly let out an ear-splitting metallic shriek. The heavy iron bolts holding the walkway to the concrete wall began to snap under the immense stress, popping loudly one by one like gunfire. The entire rusted platform violently tilted downward at a terrifying angle, sending Tariq sliding helplessly toward the perilous drop, as the heavy steel structure finally tore completely away from the cavern wall and plunged them all into the freezing, rushing darkness below. Soren instantly released the director, his only priority in the chaotic freefall being Tariq. He wrapped his massive, uninjured arm around Tariq, pulling him tightly against his chest just as they smashed into the icy black river. The impact was brutal, but Soren took the brunt of the force. The violent current seized them, tumbling them wildly through the submerged tunnels. Tariq held his breath, clinging to the heavy fabric of Soren's coat, trusting the man completely in the crushing, suffocating depths. They were swept far downstream, the deafening roar of the rapids eventually fading as the narrow tunnel opened into a vast, silent subterranean reservoir. With his last reserve of strength, Soren fought the undertow and swam them toward the shallow edge, dragging Tariq onto a bed of smooth, cold stones. They collapsed onto the shore, gasping for air, but the brief moment of relief was shattered an instant later when Soren convulsed with a horrific groan. The cybernetic implants around his temples began to flash a violent, chaotic red. Somewhere in the dark water behind them, Director Vance was drowning, and his fading heartbeat was triggering the final wipe protocol in Soren's mind. No! Tariq cried, scrambling over the wet stones. He did not have 5 minutes. He had seconds. He pulled the neural jack from his wrist, his fingers slipping on the damp metal, and forced it into the access port behind Soren's ear. Tariq closed his eyes and dove into the digital storm of Soren's mind. The wiping protocol was a massive wave of destructive red code, feeding off a fading external biometric signal. Tariq knew he could not stop the wave by fighting it. Instead, he targeted the receiver. His fingers flew across his holographic keyboard, activating the dormant neural anchor he had planted during their first connection. He sliced through the corporate security layers, bypassing the external link and using his own stable biometric signature to replace Vance's dying heartbeat with a continuous rhythm. The red wave froze, confused by the false signal, and then slowly dissolved into harmless white static. Tariq pulled the jack free, his entire body shaking with exhaustion. Soren lay perfectly still for a terrifying moment. Then slowly, the security chief took a deep, shuddering breath. The harsh red glow faded from his temples, replaced by the gentle, familiar blue of his optical enhancements. He opened his eyes, and the profound recognition in them told Tariq everything he needed to know. The memories were safe. Soren was safe. You did it, Soren whispered, his voice incredibly weak but filled with absolute awe. He reached up with his uninjured arm, pulling Tariq down into a desperate, clinging embrace. Tariq buried his face in the crook of Soren's neck, the tears he had been holding back finally falling freely. I told you I would not let them take you away from me again, Tariq sobbed, holding the massive man as if the world would end if he let go. They stayed in the dark for a long time, holding each other until the adrenaline faded and the cold reality of their situation set in. But they were no longer a corporate enforcer and a runaway thief. They were two survivors who had finally found their way back to each other. Tariq used his remaining medical supplies to bandage Soren's shattered shoulder, and together they began the long, arduous climb out of the city's forgotten depths. 3 weeks later, the perpetual winter of Neo-Reykjavik was thousands of miles behind them. Tariq stood on the wooden balcony of a small, secluded cabin surrounded by towering green pines, breathing in the warm, salt-tinged air of the southern coast. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant strokes of gold and violet. He heard the soft creak of the floorboards behind him and felt a pair of strong, familiar arms wrap around his waist. Soren rested his chin on Tariq's shoulder, his cybernetic enhancements catching the golden light of the fading sun. The former security chief wore simple, comfortable clothes, and the harsh, calculated lines of his face had softened entirely. The memories of the White Room, the fire, and the cruel corporate world were still there, but they no longer held any power over them. Tariq leaned back into Soren's solid warmth, covering the larger man's hands with his own. He turned his head slightly, capturing Soren's lips in a slow, deep, and impossibly tender kiss that held the promise of 1,000 tomorrows. They had survived the darkness of their past, and for the first time in their lives, the future belonged entirely to them.